He hadn't seen a single coin yet, only the promise of battle and the gnawing fear that this might be a one-way trip to heaven or hell.
Man of Wargaming. Wargaming lore and fantastic fiction.
A Trench Crusade short story. Caza de Reliquias. Chapter 1. Of Crows and Corpses. The weight of the world, or at least a week's worth of Bernard Miller's ammunition, dug into Miquel's aching back. Each step was a fresh jolt of pain, a constant reminder of his meager place in this grim procession. He was just a kid, barely a man, swallowed whole by the brutal reality of the trench wars. The dogs of war, as they called themselves, were a pack of wolves, and he was the runt, the one burdened with the heaviest load, the one least likely to survive. His so-called recruiter, Charlotte Bullseye Bouchard, a woman whose eyes held the cold glint of a seasoned killer, had plucked him from the streets of Cordoba like a stray dog. One look, one sharp order, and he was bound to this grim pilgrimage, a quest for relics in a land soaked in blood and despair. He hadn't seen a single coin yet, only the promise of battle and the gnawing fear that this might be a one-way trip to heaven or hell. Bernard, or Big Born, was a mountain of a man shrouded in a battered leather coat. His machine gun looked like a toy in his massive hands. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was a guttural rumble that sent shivers down Miquel's spine. "Get the bloody ammo here, now," was the longest sentence he had uttered to Miquel. Yet Miquel clung to this grim duty, desperate to learn, to prove himself, to one day stand as an equal among these hardened warriors. Charlotte, their hawk-eyed leader, surveyed the desolate landscape through her rifle's scope. A subtle gesture, a silent command, and they were moving again, out of the crater and into the heartlands of Hispania. The land was a scarred canvas of mud and craters, punctuated by the skeletal remains of trees and the hollow eyes of destroyed farmhouses. This was a world where death was a constant companion, where hope withered and died like the scorched earth. Bernard lumbered out of the crater, his heavy footsteps a morbid drumbeat. Miquel followed, his body silently moaning in protest. Behind them, Claire Markovich, the medic, emerged like a ghost in her long white robe. She carried several small bags, and on her belt hung a long and wicked-looking knife. Her face, half hidden, bore the map of her pain, jagged scars that whispered tales of unimaginable horrors. Her eyes, cold and distant, held a chilling promise. She could heal or she could kill with equal efficiency. Behind Claire, the brothers, Stan and Miller, materialized from the depths of the crater, their worn green uniforms and filthy brown cloaks blending seamlessly with the ravaged landscape. Their faces were etched with weariness, their eyes haunted by the ghosts of battles past. They were a study in silent grimness, two old soldiers bound by a shared history of violence and loss. What he didn't understand was that while the men looked similar in age and gear, they didn't look related at all. Finally, Hans Vanderbilt and Bud climbed out, a bizarre pair. Hans, a burly brute in mismatched and ill-fitting armor, grinned like a madman, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. The huge maul he carried, which he endearingly calls Vanessa, looked like it had seen a lot of action. Bud, the explosives expert of sorts, chattered nervously, his forced cheerfulness a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom. He was a walking contradiction, a frail man, not very good with a gun or trench club, but with a deadly accurate throwing arm, the joker of the pack and a harbinger of fire and destruction. Charlotte descended the muddy slope, her movements fluid and predatory, with long brown hair in a tight braid, dancing over a dark green cloak. Her fancy rifle, a sleek and deadly instrument, was an extension of herself. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. In this desolate world, she was an apex predator, and the others followed her like wolves, trailing their alpha. Miquel, despite his fear and exhaustion, felt a flicker of something akin to hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. Maybe he could become one of them. She could teach him how to survive in the trenches and fight those bastard heretics. God has guided him to this group for a reason. He's sure of it. The journey to Avila la Nueva was almost at an end, but their concentration must remain unwavering. The landscape grew bleaker, the silence heavier, the air thick with the stench of decay. They moved like shadows, ghosts in a land of ghosts, each step bringing them closer to the unknown horrors that awaited them in the ruined village. The crows circled overhead, their harsh cries a mournful lament for the world they had lost, and a grim reminder of the fate that awaited those who dared to venture into the heart of no man's land. Chapter 2. Avila la Nueva, Whispers of the Damned. Clear, Big Burn's voice rumbled like distant thunder, the word barely audible above the frantic hammering of Miguel's heart. He risked a peek over the trench lip, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. Charlotte, a specter in green, was a mere shadow against the skeletal remains of a blasted tree on a nearby hill. He could feel her gaze, sharp and assessing, even though he couldn't see her face. The village of Avila la Nueva was a tomb of shattered stone and twisted metal. Blackened husks of houses clawed at the sky, their hollow windows like vacant eyes staring into the abyss. Yet, piercing the gloom was the defiant spire of the church tower, a lonely sentinel against the encroaching darkness. It was a glorious reminder of a hard battle, fought and won, but at a terrible price. Whispers of ancient relics had lured them to this forsaken place. Treasures hidden beneath the church, a beacon of hope in this desolate wasteland. But the stories were also laced with warnings, tales of a vicious band of heretics, El Quemado, who roamed these lands, their hearts as black as the charred ruins around them. Miquel shivered, the weight of his ammo pack suddenly feeling heavier. 2 days they had journeyed through this blighted landscape, a silent procession of grim-faced pilgrims. Only the ever-present crows and the occasional gruesome sight of a body abandoned in a ditch had broken the oppressive silence. Charlotte, ever vigilant, had been their eyes and ears, a phantom moving ahead, ensuring their path was clear. As they crept into the village, the air grew thick with the stench of decay. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the mournful creaking of rotting wood and the distant cawing of crows. It was a silence that screamed of hidden dangers, of eyes watching from the shadows. Nerves tingled throughout Miguel's body, every muscle coiled, ready to spring. The church loomed before them, its stone facade scarred and blackened, yet its presence undeniable. Charlotte, her movements as fluid as smoke, slipped inside, her eyes scanning every corner. Spread out, she commanded in a hushed tone. "Look for anything out of place." Miquel, following close behind Baron, felt a surge of nervous energy. This was it. This was why they had come. The thrill of the unknown battled with the gnawing fear of what lurked in the shadows. He watched as Byrne, with surprising gentleness, deposited his heavy ammo pack by the base of the tower. "Go," Byrne grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Have a look around." Miquel joined the rest in a silent but thorough sweep through the entire church. An hour crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the shattered windows, illuminating the emptiness of the church. Disappointment gnawed at Miquel. Had they come all this way for nothing? As if reading his thoughts, Claire, her scarred face impassive, gestured towards a corner. "Rest a while, lad," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "We'll keep searching." Miquel stumbled towards the wall, exhaustion weighing down on him. He slumped against the cold stone, the impact sending a strange vibration through the wall. "Shh!" Byrne's sharp hiss startled him. Both their eyes met, a spark of realization passing between them. The wall sounded hollow. With a grunt, Byrne hefted his machine gun and slammed the butt against the wall. A loud crack echoed through the church, and a section of the wall crumbled, revealing a gaping hole. Alarm followed up with excitement, rippled through the group, a silent wave of anticipation. Baron, after a moment of contemplation, turned to Miquel. "You're the smallest," he rumbled. "You go first." Miguel's heart pounded against his ribs. Honor or runt work? He wasn't sure, but Charlotte's sharp nod left no room for argument. Claire handed him a flickering lantern, its orange glow casting dancing shadows on the dusty walls. Miquel squeezed through the opening, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. At first, he saw nothing but cobwebs and rotting wood. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he spotted them. Crates, stacked high and shrouded in darkness. He crawled further, the lantern beam illuminating rows upon rows of bottles. "Crates full of booze," he whispered back through the opening. A low murmur rippled through the group. Then, Bud's voice, loud and irreverent, broke the tension. Those pious priests were a bunch of dirty bootleggers. A collective groan of annoyance met his words, but the glimmer of excitement in their eyes was undeniable. "Let's get the liquor out," Charlotte said, her voice tight with anticipation. "See if it's worth hauling back." The disappointment was evident in her voice. They enlarged the hole and began hauling out the crates, their movements silent and swift. Hans, with a connoisseur's eye, examined a bottle, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Good quality, a fine vintage," he declared. 3 crates later, Miquel emerged from the hole, covered in filth and reeking of something decidedly unpleasant. But he didn't care. They had found something. They had something to show for their journey. As he watched the others examining the bottles, a flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he had found his place among these strange and dangerous pilgrims. Chapter 3. Siren of Doom. The air crackled with a nervous energy as everyone scrambled with the crates of booze, the initial excitement of the discovery replaced by a pragmatic discussion of profit margins, except Bud, of course, who proposed to drink it all themselves. Miquel, bone-weary but strangely content, allowed himself a fleeting moment of respite, closing his eyes against the dim light of the church. But the illusion of peace shattered abruptly. He was plunged into a disorienting half-dream, a chilling vision of isolation and utter abandonment. Cold, black shadows coiled around him, suffocating him, whispering blasphemies that chilled his soul. Then, a rough hand on his shoulder yanked him back to reality. Big Burn, his face a mask of grim urgency, shoved something into Miquel's hands. "Put these in now," he growled, his voice laced with an unfamiliar tension. Miquel looked down, confused, and saw wax pellets. Even before he fully registered what they were, a faint, ethereal song drifted on the wind. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated evil, a discordant melody that clawed at his sanity, filling him with despair and a searing headache. He jammed the earplugs in, the sudden silence a welcome balm to his tortured senses. He glanced around, bewildered. The others were already in battle positions, their faces taut with anticipation and dread. Charlotte, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination, pointing orders before disappearing up the winding stairs of the church tower. Oh no, a heretic chorister. Miquel had heard whispers of these twisted souls, but the reality was far more horrifying than any tale. They were under attack. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The village outside seemed eerily quiet, deceptively so. Miquel scanned the ruins, his eyes straining for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the skeletal remains of houses and blackened trees gently swaying in the wind. Charlotte, now perched high in the tower, mirrored his actions, her rifle scope sweeping the perimeter. Then she saw it. A grotesque figure on the outskirts of the village, a small, ragged wretch holding its own severed head aloft. Eerie rivulets of blood pulsed from the gaping neck wound, a macabre symphony of the damned. Charlotte felt a wave of nausea churn in her stomach, but her hand remained steady. The chorister was behind a destroyed wall, but the outstretched head was clearly visible. She aimed, took into account the wind and distance, then fired. The shot echoed through the church, the bullet striking the severed head. For a moment, the chorister seemed oblivious. Then its body convulsed, dropping the head with a sickening thud. The song abruptly ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. A triumphant roar erupted from the dogs of war, their battle cry echoing through the desolate village. But their celebration was short-lived. Dark shapes materialized from the shadows, surging towards the church from all directions. Charlotte's voice, sharp and urgent, rang out from the tower, pinpointing the heretics' positions. Then, a barrage of bullets slammed into the tower wall, forcing her to duck for cover. Big Burn unleashed a torrent of gunfire from his machine gun, a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the church. Bullets ripped through a ruined house, sending dark figures scattering. "Come and get some," Burn bellowed, his voice a primal challenge. Miquel huddled beside him, the thunderous roar of the gun deafening even with the earplugs in. Stan and Miller, their faces grim, took up positions on the east side, their rifles cracking with deadly precision. Bud, a maniac in his eye, hurled Molotov cocktails from a tower window. The flaming bottles arced through the air, crashing into the ruins north of the church and setting them ablaze. Thick, black smoke billowed into the sky, choking the air and casting an eerie glow on the scene. "Good thinking, Bud," Charlotte yelled down, her voice tight with urgency. Can you do the same east and west?" He grumbled, "If I had enough Molotovs, I would, ma'am." The heretics pressed closer, their forms becoming clearer in the flickering light of the fires. Miquel caught glimpses of demonic symbols crudely scrawled on their uniforms and grotesque trophies dangling from their belts. But it was their eyes that chilled him to the bone. Tiny, malevolent embers burning in the darkness. "Refill!" Byrne roared, and Miquel scrambled to provide him with a fresh ammo canister, his heart pounding in his chest. "There are too many," Charlotte shouted from the tower, picking off a heretic with a well-aimed shot. "We need an escape route." Hans, his face set and determined, worked feverishly with Claire to prepare the bottles of booze for transport. Bud, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency, grabbed a handful. "Give me a few bottles." Hans hesitated, then, at Claire's nod, relinquished them. Bud ripped up some strips of cloth, his movements frantic. Within moments, flaming bottles were raining down on the surrounding ruins east and west, turning most of the village into a blazing inferno. Charlotte, Byrne, and the brothers laid down a withering barrage of covering fire as Claire called for Miquel, pointing towards his backpack, which was now almost empty. They put the last bottles in there quickly and made ready to move. As out of nowhere, a deep, mocking voice echoed through the village, a voice that seemed to emanate from the very fires themselves. "Do you really think fire will stop the heralds of hell?" Then a monstrous figure emerged from the flames, a towering giant clad in black armor, adorned with leering demonic faces. A wicked sword, pulsating with an inner white-hot glow, was held loosely in its grip. "That's a bloody anointed," Bud whimpered, his voice trembling. But Byrne simply roared, "Then take this, you damn demon spawn," and unleashed a torrent of bullets into the approaching monstrosity. Sparks flew as the bullets ricocheted off the armor, the sound deafening. Smoke billowed, obscuring the anointed from view. When the smoke cleared, the anointed stood there, unscathed, its chilling laughter echoing through the chaos. A wave of terror washed over Miquel, freezing him in place, until Claire's soft prayer broke through his fear. "God, have mercy on us. Show us the way." Chapter 4. Booze and Backup Plans. The anointed strode towards the church with a menacing grace. Most of his heretic followers had retreated from the fires, but some were still lurking in the shadows of the ruins, watching the spectacle unfold. Up close, he looked even more monstrous, his demonic sword, longer than a grown man, swaying effortlessly by his side. As the anointed neared the church, Hans burst out of a broken window. With huge strides, he marched straight toward the anointed. He planted himself right in front of him, standing as tall as he could with Vanessa clenched menacingly in his hands. "Hey, ugly sack of burned shit, let's see if you're all talk and no skill with that fancy blade of yours," he taunted, a brave smirk plastered on his face. The anointed, towering over Hans by nearly 2 heads, laughed mockingly. "This is what the feeble warriors of your pathetic god have to offer? A fat man with a stick? Disappointing." "I'll shove this little stick up your arse, moron," Hans retorted, his grin widening. The tension was palpable as they sized each other up, flames roaring in the background. Hans raised Vanessa and bellowed, "For God and glory!" At that moment, Claire leapt from a second-floor window, her white figure soaring through the air like an avenging spirit. She landed behind the anointed with inhuman speed and grace, her blade flashing in the firelight. With a swift stab, she pierced the anointed's armor behind the knee, then rolled away and dashed behind Hans. The anointed howled in frustration, dropping to one knee. Hans seized the opportunity, swinging Vanessa with all his might and striking the anointed's helmet with a sickening ring. "Now go," he shouted without looking back. The dogs of war sprang into action, moving out of the church and dragging a bewildered Miquel with them. He had seen the whole spectacle but couldn't believe it, trying to move as fast as he could with a backpack full of liquor on his sore back. Moving south from the church, away from the blazing village. The anointed, dazed by the blow, crouched in the mud for a moment. Hans prepared for the killing strike, but the anointed's sword flashed upward, slicing Vanessa in two. The anointed stood up, chuckling. "Well, well, well. You pilgrim trash have some dirty tricks up your sleeves. I'm impressed." He grabbed Hans by the neck, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. Hans struggled, still grinning defiantly. With a sickening crack, the anointed snapped Hans's neck, and the world went silent. He tossed Hans's lifeless body aside. The dogs of war laid down cover fire as the heretics pursued them. Most, however, had to move around the burning village for a proper pursuit. The ones brave enough to navigate the growing inferno were pinned down or met Claire's blade while she covered the group's rear. They were at the edge of the village and out of gun range when Claire, her knife still blood-spattered, caught up with the group, murmuring a soft prayer for Hans. But they could still clearly hear the anointed's voice over the crackling flames. "Hunt them down. Don't let those filthy beggars get away, you worthless maggots." Miquel ran for his life, not daring to look back.
Man of Wargaming. Wargaming lore and fantastic fiction. Love this story? Discover more epic lore and fiction in our other playlists. Join the Legion of Wargamers and help our community thrive. Hit like and subscribe.